Good morning. This video is brought to you by brickplcs.com. I'm assuming that you just purchased your first DirectLogic 05 processor from eBay and you're wanting to get started as fast as possible. So what we're going to cover is the wiring, the communication cables you'll need, the DirectSOFT 5 software, how to erase the program that may be on the unit, how to update the firmware so that you're sure you're operating with the latest and greatest firmware, and then we'll write our first small program. So let's start with the wiring first. To get going on this is an AR, a D005 AR, which is a 110 volt unit. So all you'll need to do is connect the three wires from 110 volts. So typically that would be the black wire on the lug that's labeled ACL, the white wire that's on the lug labeled ACN, and then your green ground on the two lugs labeled ground. Once you've connected the power, if there's a program in it already, you might see some lights come on these inputs and outputs, but really what you're looking for is the power on light over here on the right hand side. Once you're powered up, you're ready to connect your communication cable. The cable I'm using is from plccables.com. It's the DirectLogic cable. It's USB on one end and a phone plug on the other end. They're located at www.plccable.com. And this particular cable is labeled USB-D2-DSC BL. You connect one end to the USB port in your computer. The port that you use is important. You're going to have to figure out what the COM port label is on that port, but just go ahead and plug it in and it should automatically go out and find the driver for that cable. I'm using both Windows 7 and Windows 8, and in both cases it automatically recognized that cable. Now plug the other end into port 1 of the PLC and you're ready to get started. Okay, so our PLC is wired. We have the communication cable connected. The next thing we're going to do is open up DirectSOFT 5. So if you haven't purchased DirectSOFT 5 already, you're going to need that program in order to create programs for your PLC. I see it for sale on eBay from anywhere from $50 to $100. If you have to go to DirectLogic or Automation Direct, it sells for between $300 and $400. So I'm assuming you've already got the program. So what we're going to do is open that up. So I launch the DirectSOFT 5 program. This is the opening window. I've got a lot of projects on here. We need to make a communication link. So I'll erase this one and just assume we're starting from where you're starting, which is a clean program with no links. So now I right click on that link, add link. I've got my cable connected to COM port 3 on my computer. It's important that you know what COM port you're connected to. If you don't, you can go by trial and error, try 1, 2, 3, 4, or else go over to your control panel and see where the software is running for that COM link. So I'm on 3, I click next. I'm going to use not sure and let it go out and find the PLC. I'm using DirectNet and it found the PLC 5 on COM port 3. So I'm just going to call this link DL05. Now to make it actually make the connection, I double click on that new link and it's reading the program. This takes a moment because it's the first time we've used this link. Close the tip of the day and there we are. And you can see that there's a program already on this PLC. So I'm assuming you bought your PLC on eBay and it's got some big program on it that you don't need. The best thing, in my opinion, the best thing to do is just erase the PLC memory. So I do that by going to PLC, Clear Memory. Select All, and I'm going to clear the whole memory of that PLC. This is going to take a few moments, so while that's running, let's look at some additional wiring we've done to the PLC. I've simply connected one switch to input number X1. To do that, I took the neutral and jumped it over to C0. That'll provide a neutral for inputs 1 through 3. So I can use any of these inputs 1 through 3 with that one neutral connected. For the switch, I went from the hot leg through the switch to X1. So now if I switch that switch, you'll see this light go on and off on the PLC. We can't do it right now because we're still clearing the memory. So let's see where we're at on the memory. Alright, so it's done, and it has completely erased everything on that PLC. So let's put a quick program in. I'm going to switch to edit mode. I can either select F2 or click on this open contact, and we're going to use, again, we put a switch on X1, so I'm going to use X1. I'm going to let that drive output number Y0. So I simply type Y0. That's an output. I'm going to use that output, Y0, to start a timer, TMR. It's called timer number 0 is the name of this one. If I could make it, let's make it timer 1. Timer 1. And I'm going to let it count to 10 seconds. So these are in tenths of a second. So I'm put a constant in of K100, and that will allow the timer to go to 10 seconds before it times out. Once that timer is timed out, I'm going to use it to close another output. So we'll just use Y1. And then the only thing we have left to do is put the end statement in. This is probably the biggest error I find with people doing these programs. They leave the end statement out, and then the processor will fault if that end statement's not there. So just go to your last line and type end. Enter that, and we've got a complete program. I'm going to accept those edits, and then this tells me I've got more actions to take, these two colored bars. I need to write it to a program. We'll call it vid1 video. And then once it's written to disk, we need to write it to the PLC. So I write it to the PLC. We have status, but it's not running yet. There's no run light on the PLC over here. So I need to switch the mode to run mode. View the status. And this light blue tells me that that switch that we wired is made. The timer's timing. It just timed out, and it lit the second output on that PLC. So if you are watching down here on the screen, you see the inputs on and you see the two outputs are on. So let me switch the switch off. All the contacts change state to open states. The timer sitting there at 0. I switch the switch on. I immediately get the input and the output that it was connected to. It's timing, so in 10 seconds we'll get our second output, and there's our second output. The next thing I said we would learn is how to update the firmware on the PLC. So to do that, I'm going to close out the DirectSOFT program. But there's one action I'm going to take before I close that program out, and that is I'm going to switch it back to program mode. But then I'm also going to go to the PLC, and this is a step required before you update your firmware. I go from PLC down to Setup, and I select Initialize Scratchpad. Select OK. I can then close this program out. So I close the program out. If you haven't done this already, you need to go to Automation Direct's technical support site. So here's the URL. It's http://support.directautomationdirect.com/firmware/index.html, and from there you can download the firmware for the PLC. So I've already done this. I'm using the CPU DL05, so I've already downloaded that. And then the other thing you'll need is the software that actually runs in order to download the program. So that's called the Koyo support tool. I've already downloaded that also, so I'm not going to do it a second time. So that's where you find your firmware and where you find your tool. So I'll close that out, and I'm going to open up my programs, and I have it here, the firmware update tool. So I select that, select yes, update wizard type. It's a DL05. I could also do an 06 if we had the 06. Next. Make sure the run LED is not blinking. So we look over here and our run LED, not only is it not blinking, but it's not on because we're in program mode. I go to next. This is where it tells us we should start the scratch pad, and we've already done that. So I select next. Again, I'm sorry about the short interruption of the video. I ran out of time. So I'm back, and we're selecting COM port 3 to do our firmware download. I select next, and then browse to wherever you downloaded the firmware. Not the firmware tool, but the firmware itself, and it's a .bin program. So I've got mine under downloads, D05V540, and that's the .bin file. Select next, and then start updating. So this is going to take a good 10 minutes. I think it sometimes takes 15 minutes. So we're going to let that run. I'm going to stop this video, and I'll be back after it's completed. Okay, it has completed, and it tells us we need to, one, make sure that the LED light has stopped flashing. Now it is flashing, so make sure the LED has stopped flashing. If the LED is still flashing, update the firmware again. Let's select OK, then exit, and go ahead and power that off and on. There, we don't have a LED that's flashing anymore, so it has completed. Let's call our DirectSOFT program back up again. Come down, double click our link. And even though we've updated the firmware, the PLC program should still be there. So that's the program we had put in earlier. It needs to be switched back to run mode. And then the timer starts timing and everything's working. And I can interrupt that with this switch here. And that would stop the timer. So that's it for our getting started video. I think the only other thing I should show you is how to find that COM port that you're operating on. So if you go to your control panel, hardware, device manager, scroll down to your COM ports, and there we see the USB serial cable is operating on COM port number 3. So that's how I determined what COM port I was using after I plugged in the USB cable. So that's it. Visit us at brickplcs.com for more videos. We have a series on how to use the eCom module. Specifically, I use the eCom 100, and we set up email programs like a notification that a machine is shut down or you've got an intruder that's entered your home. And we also get into Modbus communications, so you can start to make your own human interface on your computer, and that's all done with Visual Basic programming. So I use Visual Basic Express 2010. But again, visit our site at brickplcs.com. Thanks.